Dr. Jazz.
But
Dr. Jazz.
yeah, man. I mean, I'll just jump in actually. So I've listened right before to the album, and A Soul in Time, and with Gary, and obviously Hadrien and Eric, and it's such a beautiful record. And when you contacted me, I didn't know about it honestly.
Right.
It's so much music out there, so it's terrible just to get out there, and which is great in a sense, but also terrible because it's
Yeah. Well, there are 90,000 songs are released every day.
that's scary.
Yeah. So even for, and then if you think about it, there's 60 million songs on Spotify every year, don't even get one play.
Yeah, that's
I mean,
that's insane, right?
so you're lucky if you even get plays, and then to get even on charts, that's a whole nother ball game. And then for this album uh, to be on the ballot for a Grammy nomination,
Yeah.
is great. So yeah, they just that's the big news for the album right now. It's only been out 4 months, and it got on the ballot, so it's voted ending October 15th. So what'll happen now is November 8th, they'll announce all the nominees.
Mm.
So I'll find out then, because the funny thing is about this album is that when we decided to make it, Dean Brown and I, legendary guitarist,
Of course.
he one day on the way to the studio, when we were on the way, he goes, James, just do whatever you want on this album because no one's going to hear it anyway. And then, and the opposite has happened. I mean, it's gone to #1 in the charts, jazz
Mm.
charts and rock charts, and it's on the ballot. So yeah, pretty interesting journey.
Yeah. You mentioned Dean. I want to start with Dean. And
Yeah.
I've done this talk with Dean like 2 years or 3 years ago. And obviously he's been one of my favorite guitarists and composers, and such a nice guy. And uh, how did you get, first of all, Dean involved in this project? What's your story with him?
Well, I have a band, local band called the Ghost Jazz Trio, and I started building the brand um, in 2020. I started the band in 2017, but came out with my first album. And the reason I even did an album, first of all, with that band was just to have something to give
Yeah.
to events, people that were putting on events, so they'd have a good recording. Well, then it turned out that it got nominated by the San Diego Music Awards in the Best Jazz Album category.
Oh, wow.
So I was like, wow, that's interesting. So then I did another album the next year. That first album was called Invisible Time, and it was an acoustic upright, me on jazz guitar, and then drums. The second one, I was lucky enough to get Nathan Brown on bass, and he was a bassist that has been touring with Coco Montoya, the guitarist, for about 15 years. He's played with Bob James, Eric Marienthal, a lot of people in the smooth jazz world. So I had kind of decided to get into the smooth jazz, contemporary jazz, because there's more money in it just to get events, because no one's going to want to listen to fusion while they're getting married. So I did the second album. It was called On the Level, and that came out on my own label, Ghost Records. And then I was lucky enough to have Patrick Yondal, who's a jazz guitarist. He has 27 albums out, very good jazz guitarist. So I featured him on it. Then the next album, called Dreams Above, the next year, featured me on the cover and featuring me, because no one knew who I was, and it was time to start getting the name out there. And all three of those albums were nominated for Best Jazz Album of the Year.
Mm.
So I figured I was onto something. And so then I decided I needed someone to produce the album. So I made a appointment with the engineer, Alan Sanderson, uh, who mixed the first three albums and also recorded my guitar on all the albums. And he said, you know, James, I've been working with this guy. He's a producer, musician. You might have heard of him, Dean Brown. And to be honest with you, I never heard of Dean Brown. And I'm
Really?
a guitar player.
Wow, man. Okay.
Yeah, or
Wow.
maybe I heard him, but it just never registered because there's a lot of guitarists. And so I said, yeah, sure. And I go, who is he? And he brought him up on Wikipedia, and it's like Billy Cobham and all these
Brecker Brothers, yeah.
people. Yeah, he's played with everybody and Grammy, blah, blah, blah. So I go, yeah. So I set up an appointment with him. We met in a hotel lobby and I laid out my plan for him. He liked the vision. I said, I want to do a smooth jazz, contemporary jazz album, but I want it to feature the guitar more. He said he had listened to some of my other albums. He didn't think the guitar was featured enough. And so basically, I sent him all my songs. I don't read music, I play by ear.
Oh, really?
So I basically learned off records and playing with people. You know, I didn't go to formal schooling. So I would send him the recording. He had to chart it, and then he would come up with the melodies on some of them. Some of them
Okay.
were melodies. So we you know, did the album, and we had Nathan Brown on bass on that particular one, and we got a drummer, Trace Hodgins, who's a local drummer, very good. And my first time playing with him, and then Chase Pato on keyboards. He's kind of one of the top calls in San Diego and Southern California, and he's like a prodigy, just excellent. So he played on, you know, 3 albums, including that one. It was called Groove and Smooth, and that came out in 2023, March, on a Friday. And so we finished that. It came out, it was great. That got nominated for Best Jazz Album of the Year as well. And then when we first went in to record, Dean didn't really have any idea who I was or anything. And he called me the night after the first session and said, James, you guys are really good. He goes, I'm used to dealing with hobbyists, people that do it as a hobby. Because if you wouldn't mind, I'd love to play on the album. And I said, okay, that'd be great. So he goes, I'll do all the rhythm guitar, and you just come in and solo and do the melodies. And I said, great. So he basically set up these mock recordings where he uses digital drums and bass. And he takes those like a script to a movie and he sends them to everybody. Everybody learns their part and they come in. So the next session, he told everyone, hey, I'm going to be playing blah, blah, blah. Everyone was excited. A lot of the other players had seen him with Cobham and knew who he was more than I did. And so they were very excited. And then we did the album. He solos on Spanish Seas. He does an acoustic kind of Al Di Meola type solo on there. Very good. And anyway, so what happened was back and forth, driving to and from, I'd pick him up at home. We'd drive to the studio and then back home. We would talk a lot about fusion. I told him my story. You know, he would tell me stories. So during the editing, when we were recording, I would play some of my fusion stuff on my guitar. So a couple months after, we kept in touch because he's a tennis person. He loves tennis, and I love tennis. So we would text each other every day because it was in the middle of the tennis season and all this. And so we were back and forth and talking about this and that. And then he said, hey, James, what were those songs you were playing while we were editing? I go, they're songs that I wrote that are jazz fusion songs. And he says, they're really beautiful. He goes, you should record them. And I said, yeah, you know, because it's an expense and it's not going to, you know, he goes, if nothing else, just to have the recording for yourself. And he said, I'd love to be a part of it because it's in my wheelhouse. I haven't done an album in 6 years, and this would be an opportunity for me to, kind of get my juices flowing. And he kind of liked my ambitious personality anyway, because he was kind of resting on his laurels, teaching and playing now and then.
Yeah.
So I said, sure, let's do it. And I said, did you want to have the same guys in the album? And he was like, no. This album, there's only 2 people that I know that would be qualified, or 3 really, but 2 that I would want on this album. He goes, Gary Husband and Hadrien Feraud, because Gary's been playing with McLaughlin, Fourth Dimension. Hadrien plays with everybody, and he's played with McLaughlin, been on a few recordings. And I was, kind of, okay, that'd be great, and that kind of built my confidence up too, because here's Dean Brown suggesting these 2 top-tier players to play with me, and he's putting his reputation and his, who he is on the line with these guys, and that kind of made me think, wow, he likes my playing. He thinks that I'm good enough to play with them, because Samo, as you're a musician, you don't really know where you stand in the music world. And if somebody who's an icon tells you where you're at, it kind of, it's a reality check. So I said, that'd be great. So he called Gary, and he told Gary that he was going to do this album. I had about 12 songs, but we ended up doing 5 for monetary reasons. And we picked the 5. And then he contacted Hadrien, and he was into it because it's Dean. They're good friends, play with him. And Gary's been wanting to do an album with him forever, since they played together with Cobham. So that's how it started. And then Hadrien, it was great because he only had to write charts for Gary, because Hadrien does not read charts like I don't read charts.
Really? I didn't know that. Wow.
Yeah, he's just learned like I did by ear.
Really? I didn't know that.
Yeah, amazing. So I was like, oh, so that was going to be easier for Dean. And Dean said, he was telling me, he goes, this album, I want this to be kind of like the 70s, kind of, because we had talked about it, where guitar players, if you go online now, you see these guitar players, and they do they're amazing riffs, and they probably took like 10 takes to get it. He goes, I just want you to come in the studio and play your ass off, and don't, I want blood on the floor, and just go for it. No effects, just crank it. And harken back to the 70s as far as production and composition, because my songs kind of structured like that.
Yep.
And as you know, a lot of songs these days, Simon Phillips and a lot of these fusion players, Donati, they just have a groove basically that goes through it, and they do these spectacular melodies, solos, but they don't have a lot of tension and slow, and that's one of the things that Dean liked about this album. So we started recording, and what we did is we sent the mock-ups to both of them, and then Gary was going to do the drums first. And Gary, because of all his experience playing with McLaughlin, live performances and stuff, he had to basically formulate what the song was going to sound like, where I would solo in his mind. And he would have to, because from his experience, okay, the guitar player is going to be ripping at this point. So then he kicks into maybe a double kick and starts grooving, and then comes out of it. So he did the drums. Dean, to interject a little bit about Dean, he started not feeling well about August, and saying he was tired and stuff, and he wasn't feeling too good. So he was being checked out by the doctor. So he came in, and we listened to the drum tracks, and he loved it. And then we sent those to Hadrien, and Hadrien did his bass lines. Took a little longer till December. And then we sent those to Gary, and he had more. Gary did all the drums in one day. did it in 7 hours.
Man, yeah, he's insane. He's great.
Beautiful drums too.
Yeah, he's
So
amazing.
then,
Yeah,
yeah, so then Hadrien had more time, and then we sent the keyboards he could do at home, so he had a lot more time to work with them. But during that time, um, and then I had done some mock guitar. All the guitar you hear is what I did with the mock recording. I I didn't want to redo my guitar after they did theirs because it would take away from the magic. They were playing off what they heard me do.
yeah,
So even if I hit wrong notes or whatever, it I didn't care because they, you know what I mean? It might
yeah, yeah,
sound too
sure.
forced. Yeah. So during that time, Dean started getting worse feeling, and he went into the hospital in October of 2023, and then I went to visit him because he was in there for a couple of weeks, and it turned out he had an aggressive form of cancer. So that was very disheartening, and he told me. And then the funny thing is that before he went into the hospital, he went one more time to the studio with me, and I brought him a cane,
Well,
and I had to help him from the door, physically walk him to my car and pick his legs up and put him in the car. And I told Dean, you don't need to go to the studio. We can do this after your checkups and all that. But he was so passionate about this album that he was in pain. I mean, he said
mm,
he felt like knives were sticking in his back, and he was just, so we went there and did all that. And then that was the last time he was in the studio. So when I went to see him in the hospital, he, said, promise me you'll finish this album. If anything happens, I can't do it. I said, okay. So I told Gary and Hadrien what was happening, and they said, yes, for sure, we'll finish it for him. Obviously. So I contacted Eric Marienthal
mhm.
to let him know that Dean's was worsening and that he should start a GoFundMe page. So he went ahead and posted a GoFundMe page, and I had talked to um, Dean about having Eric play on one of the songs, Soul in Time. And I told Eric that I wanted sax on there, and it was actually Dean who said Eric would sound great on this. And I told Eric about it, and he said he would love to play. So it morphed from a James Morgan solo album into like a tribute kind of album to Dean
Mm,
to finish possibly his last music project.
yep.
And so it became that. And so we spent the next year. So then in December, I got all the finished product except my guitar on a flash drive, took it to Dean, but by this time Dean was taken to another place in ICU. And I went in, and of course he couldn't talk. He had, tubes and things. And I just told him, everyone loves you. We're going to finish this album. I hope you get better. But I think he already knew
Yeah.
what he didn't want to tell me. He couldn't talk, but he didn't want me to know. And then a month later, he passed away. And, it's just hard to fathom that he was gone. So then I had to do my guitar parts, and without Dean there, because when I played with Dean in the room, he would like to say, okay, do your solo, and he'd be on his phone. He goes, okay, do it again. And he goes, okay, I can work with that. And then he would work with it. And then there would be parts where I might not like what I did, and he goes, oh, I love that. Like I hit a string with my thumb by accident.
Yeah, those are good moments. Yeah.
Yeah. And he goes, because it's real. It's not, all polished and technical,
Yeah, he was such a player, yeah, himself. So
Yes.
yeah, makes sense.
So, yeah, that's what happened. Then I talked to Eric, and I said, if you want to play on this, Dean really wanted you to play on it. And he said yes. And they donated their time after that to Hadrien and Eric, because I was paying for it, obviously. And that was just because they wanted to be a part of this thing. And funny thing is I named the album A Soul in Time before
Mm,
it was kind of prophetic in a way because Dean was a soul in time, And yeah, so we finished the album, and Guitar One Records is the label I go with. And as you know, labels nowadays are really just marketing tools.
Yeah, yeah,
They don't pay for recordings, and
yeah. It's over. Yeah.
So that's how Dean became involved in. He was a real part of this album. So when I was soloing, doing my solos, the first song on the Edge was the first take, and I had to think in my mind that Dean was in the room
Mhm.
telling me, because he told me his advice, James, practice your ass off with these things at home, but when you come in the studio, forget everything you did, because just play in the moment, and that's what I did. I just
Mhm.
imagine myself playing with those guys like you would at backtracking, and you just in your room and you just
Yeah,
close
yeah.
your eyes, and yeah. So
Beautiful.
yeah, and then the album came out and released the single first. We did an edited version of A Soul in Time with Eric for Smooth Jazz Radio that made it on the top 100 charts. It actually closed number 73 and the top 100 smooth jazz charts for 2023. I mean, here again, it was an album that no one was going to hear, you know. So yeah, that was the journey to record the A Soul in Time.
Interesting. Yeah,
Yeah.
interesting, man. What about the tunes? I wanted to ask you about the tunes. They're like, what was your process when writing them or when making these sketches? I mean, they're beautiful
Yeah, the
melodies, and
arrangements.
yeah, the arrangements are
Well,
beautiful. And
what I did is I send the song form to him, and Dean would write the melodies harmonizing with the chord form.
okay.
And yeah, he was a genius at writing melodies. Those melodies are amazing. I mean, if you listen to A Feather's Touch,
Yeah, yeah, it's beautiful.
all
Yeah,
all that synthesizer work, melodies, all written out.
really. Oh wow. Okay.
Yeah. And Eyes of Truth.
Yeah.
So On the Edge was a song that I had written before, one of the ones he heard. He liked it. We agreed on that one. Feathers Touch, I wrote a couple of weeks before we recorded. He wanted something. He says, "Do you have anything that has more of a kind of a groove beat that could be radio friendly, but kind of?" I said, "I'll write something." So I did. And then Eyes of Truth was a song I wrote back in the 90s.
Oh,
And Samba Sky, I also wrote back in like around 94,
well, all right.
but I just never recorded it. And he liked it. He just thought it had a lot of energy, and it was reminiscent of Al Di Meola, kind of Return to
Yep.
Forever.
Yep.
So that's how we did that. And then again, he wrote the melodies, and then Gary took those and put um, his story. The thing is, when you
Mm.
play with players like Gary and Hadrien and Eric, they're not studio musicians, so you don't tell them, "Hey, do this, do that." You just say, because they have a story to tell,
Absolutely. Yeah.
and you just give it to them, and it's it's that kind of music, as you can hear, that's so natural for them to play.
Yeah. Yeah.
Five. The song Eyes of Truth has 5 different time signatures.
Oh, but for Gary, that's like, that he played
Yeah,
with Holdsworth, and stuff like that. So it's like,
yeah. And as
yeah,
Holdsworth, he would tell you that Holdsworth would tell him, he liked it more when he played outside
yeah, yeah,
and flavored it up and I like that too, because it gives you more freedom. I think a lot of players, uh, to be honest with you, the smooth jazz or the music I play with Ghost Jazz Trio is harder for me to play than jazz fusion, because it's structured and I have to stay it's like a Navy
cage.
SEAL. I have to
Yeah,
stay
yeah,
in my 3-foot world. I can't go out of it. And unless it's a club, then we can kind of spread out a little bit. But with jazz fusion rock, I mean, it's about breaking barriers. And in pushing yourself to new heights. And you can tell in my solos that I'm just like on the edge, like the song On the Edge. I'm playing with these players, and I know that I have to deliver my best as far as what my story is, not necessarily technically or anything. So that's kind of how the songs came
Came
to
about.
be, you
Yeah,
know.
yeah. Interesting.
And I think they sound good because it's a combination of everybody's story interpretation of it.
Yeah, yeah, definitely.
Hadrien's amazing,
Oh
you know.
man, both of these guys,
Yeah,
beautiful trio. Yeah. Uh,
yeah.
you mentioned Al Di Meola and McLaughlin before. Were these guys that, I guess in the mid 70s when you were
A teen.
a teen, that those guys were probably really important, or like, how did you get into this music, like into fusion and
Well,
jazz and
and I'll tell you, it's interesting because in my teens, everybody was listening to Grand Funk Railroad 10 years after The Who, Zeppelin, Journey had just come out.
yeah,
And I was listening to my brother who lived in Carmel. Grew up in the Monterey Bay area. He was listening to ECM records and, Airto and, Chick Corea albums and things like that. So I was listening to John McLaughlin when McLaughlin came out with the Intermounting Flame.
hmm
Actually, to go all the way back, the Beatles were like a huge inspiration when I first heard them. So that to see the fun, in the movie A Hard Day's Night, it's
yeah,
wow, music, that's fun. Music's fun, and I wanted to do that. So uh, what happened was I listened to Intermounting Flame, and then returned. My brother brought over Hymn to the Seventh Galaxy album, Return to Forever.
oh, with Bill Connors, right? That one, I think.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and he
I
said, "You
love
got to
Bill.
hear this album." And he's 4 years older than me, so I was 15, and he was, almost 20. And so he goes, "Oh yeah, I saw these guys, and the guitar player, he just looks up in the air and plays. He's just amazing." And I heard it, and I was like, "I want to play like that." So I started playing with the records, Intermounting Flame, and so I would get jam sessions together for the next few years, playing Birds of Fire,
Yeah,
and I would copy the chords off the record, not knowing, thinking of time, but just the chords. And then I'd play Vulcan Worlds off Stanley Clark's album,
yeah.
different songs. So what happened was years later, I was up in Berkeley at a record store called Leopold's Records, very popular record store there. And I went back to the back room and I pushed the door open because it had separate music playing from the rock music. And a poster blew up, and I thought I saw the name Bill Connors on an index card. So I lifted it up and it said Bill Connors is giving guitar lessons. So I took the whole card and I took it home and I called the number, and it turned out it was his girlfriend, but they had split up. And she said he moved back to Los Angeles to live with his parents. So I was able to track his number down, his parents' number. Um, I was almost 20 at this time. So I called up and I pretended I was a manager. Like, yeah. And I had to lower my voice. I was like, "Yeah, I'd like to speak to Bill Connors. If you could have him call, blah, blah, blah." So I forgot about it. And a few weeks later, the phone rings and I'm living with my mom at the time. I'm upstairs practicing, and my mom yells, the phone rang back then. And she says, "BC is on the phone." And I go, "Oh." So I pick up the phone and he goes, "Hi, is this James?" I go, "Yeah." He goes, "This is Bill Connors." And I started hyperventilating, get nervous, like, "Oh shit, it's Bill." And he goes, "Are you the manager that called?" And I said, "Hey, I'm just James. I was just trying to get a hold of you." And he liked that. He goes, "Well, that was, I like that," he said. So he goes, "Oh, I live in Half Moon Bay, which is north of Santa Cruz, where I lived. And I'm giving lessons. So if you'd like to come up." I said, "Well, I also have a friend who would like to take lessons." He said, "Sure." So I went up there, and at that time I was really into McLaughlin. I was playing a white Les Paul, and I wore white clothes, and I even joined Sri Shimnoi's. I was initiated, and I was doing meditations with
Oh,
Carlos
okay.
Santana and his wife because I was into the whole Sri Shimnoi thing. And so I showed up wearing all white and with my guitar, and he just looked at me and kind of almost laughed because he knew I was a McLaughlin clone. So I took my lesson. I waited outside. My friend took the lesson. Then we drove home. But at the end of the lesson, he says, "Do me a favor, just wear normal clothes when you come in next time." And he goes, and I told him I was taking music courses at college. I started. He goes, "Drop out." He goes, "I'll teach you everything you need to know." And I
Mm.
go, "Okay." So I dropped out, and it turned out that he wanted to be paid with pot, marijuana.
Yeah.
So I would just bring him weed, and
Oh,
and it turned out in those days my mom grew weed, so I was got it for
that's
free.
only in California possible,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
That's like,
So I was bringing him bags of weed, and he would smoke, and we would smoke, and then we'd do the lesson. So he lived in this little room that was no bigger than a bedroom, maybe 100 square feet. He had a small cot, a chair with a footstool, and he had a picture of Segovia behind the chair. And his routine was to get up at 5 in the morning, practice until 8, eat breakfast, practice from 9 till noon, eat lunch, practice from 1 till 5, eat dinner, eat dinner, and then give lessons, and then practice until about midnight. Do that every day. And he was learning classical music. So what happened was hanging out, we kind of became friends. He liked, he would tell me stories about Chick, and how he was kind of bitter about that whole thing because Chick had replaced a lot of his guitar playing on the
mm.
record with organ. And the whole Scientology thing too was interfering with their relationship. So anyway, he was into classical. He was into this guy named Jim Bream or something. He was a
Yeah.
classical guitarist. I think that's what his name was.
Yep.
And they were having a classical guitar festival in Carmel. So we ended up driving down there for the 3-day festival and stayed at my brother's house, who turned me on to Bill. So my brother was very excited to meet Bill Connors, you know, and Bill cooked us dinner, made chicken cacciatore, told us stories about how he stole his first amplifier he ever had from Guitar Center in Los Angeles, broke into Guitar Center after midnight and running across Sunset Boulevard with and how he made a fake stage in his bedroom so he could hide it from his parents and store it under so it was just funny to hang out with the guy that you kind of idolized
Yeah.
and became friends with. So that was my introduction to that kind of music. And so from then on, I just did jazz fusion bands and played and just jammed and kind of played clubs once in a while. Didn't do any recordings. And then about did that for about a couple of decades actually. And then around I guess in the 90s, I started a band. I had a band called The Cage, and it was kind of between an Eric Johnson Journey kind of band, and people liked it. And yeah, so I just kept that fusion thing going. And in my mind, I was also very inspired by Bitches Brew
Mm.
because I felt like Bitches Brew, all those guys on that album kind of spawned into the jazz fusion thing. And if you think about it, jazz fusion was only like from the 70s, early 70s, maybe till 79,
Yeah.
right in that little area. But it had such an impact on the music industry. And I felt a lot of those guys got more into because the 80s happened and everything got into digital drums and all that. It got funky. And I wanted to keep doing what I heard in the 70s. So I kept that up and until I actually started the Ghost Jazz Trio, when I switched more into the contemporary jazz to get work. Because again, that wasn't a monetizable, music. So the funny thing is, Samo, that's interesting is that the interviews that I do with some of these people on YouTube and stuff that are younger, or people I talk to, they think this is new music.
Okay.
They'll go,
Well, I mean,
wow,
it is new still, but yeah,
but they'll
yeah.
go, it's neat how you combine rock with jazz.
Oh, come on.
And, and I'm like, yeah, well, there was a period when people did that. And I tell them about it. But so I feel like this album is really a tribute to that time.
Mm.
I hope that it comes across like that. And if it does get nominated, which I'll find out November 8th or so, and if it happens to win by any chance, because anything's possible, I would love it to win because it would be a legacy to Dean.
Yeah.
And I could dedicate everything and really, feel like it came full circle,
Mm. Yeah.
So, I mean, I'm
That's-
67 years old and I'm finally
Yeah. Yeah, well, never too late, man.
doing it. Yeah. So
It's never too late, yeah. But you and Dean must have been the same age, right? Kind of
he
more
was
or less.
3 years older than me.
Yeah, I thought so, yeah.
And then Demiola, who I've communicated with too. It's funny because I've always had brushes with the greats. When I had my band Dialogue project, which was nominated for Best Jazz Album, even though it was jazz rock fusion, the album was called Jazz Fusion, The Art of Jazz Fusion. And we opened for Alan Holdsworth. Well, as you know, Alan Holdsworth usually just his band plays. He was on the phone talking to the owner of a club called Brick by Brick in San Diego, a guy named Max. And he heard my CD in the background.
Wow.
Because his girlfriend's brother was the keyboardist in my band and had given him the CD. And he goes, "Who's that playing in the background?" He goes, "Oh, that's a local band my girlfriend's brother's in called Dialogue Project." And there's videos on my Ghost Jazz Trio channel. And he goes, "Wow." He goes, "Why don't you see if they'd like to open for me?" And he called and said, Holdsworth would like you to open. I was like, great. So I got to open for him, meet him.
Beautiful, man. Yeah.
Donati played on drums. It was in 2013, I think, on Friday the 13th, actually. And Haslip on bass and a young keyboardist, blonde guy, can't remember his name. He actually died shortly after.
Oh, really?
So we opened for him. It was mostly guys there, and they were all coming up getting our autograph because they figured because we were opening that we were somebody. So I was autographing albums and giving them to people. It was great. And and then I could see Alan over on the side watching us while we were playing and stuff, and it was just it was surreal. So did that, and then I actually bumped into him at a music store in the acoustic guitar section in a room, and he was playing, and we ended up jamming together and talking about some stuff. And then so I met Bill and him, and got to open for him, and then who else? And then of course Dean.
Yeah.
So I've always kind of had little brushes, little signs along the way that told me I was destined for something, and because this album for me is like it's something I always wanted to do, to record it and play with players like that. I mean,
Oh man, you get better, of course.
and the lesson is I've learned is you just keep working on your craft. They say that the top players in the world have put in an average of 10,000 hours of practice time. So if you just keep up your story and you play and play, when those opportunities come and you're ready for them, you don't know how it's going to happen. It's mostly luck. I mean, there's a lot of players that I think are greater than me, but they may never get the opportunities I've had.
Of course, yep.
And you just have to, feel blessed and stay true to yourself.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah. And this story is going on, right? I saw on your Bandcamp. You have basically a new one with Hadrien
Yeah,
and
so
Gary
since
coming
this
up. I
one
mean,
is, I've been getting a lot of emails and messages, and then people, interviewers saying, the EP album is good, but it's too short. I want more. Are you just teasing us? Are you going to do a new one? So I talked to Gary and I said, would you like to do another album? Seems to be working. I mean, we're on the ballot, you know. And Hadrien, they said, yeah,
hmm,
we'd love to do it.
beautiful.
But as you know, they're both very busy. Gary's currently doing this weekend a drum clinic. McLaughlin's there, and the drummer that plays with Fourth Dimension. And then he just did a short tour with Billy Cobham
Oh yeah, he was in
Anniversary.
Europe. Yeah.
Yeah, and then he just recorded with Robin Ford. He's going to be touring with Robin Ford. And then, of course, Adrian's playing Keiko Matsui and always. So we probably won't start the process. According to Gary, he said he's busy up till the end of the year, till the start of 2025, which is fine because it gives me time to work on songs. And I've already sent him like 2 or 3 songs to put in file. And then when they get time, they can. So how it'll work this time, since Dean isn't with us, Gary, who helped produce the last album, and he's the one who we sent the tapes to, who went in and had 2 of the top engineers in the world really work on it. He's going to go ahead and write the melodies. He's going to do what Dean did and work with the form and help produce it. And then Hadrien, I actually sent him a song that I titled Feraud's Mirage, 2 French words, where he can do not that fast stuff he does, but that fretless sound
Yeah.
he gets, that sound. So I wrote this song and I sent it to him and I said, you write the melody, you're going to play the melody on the song. So yeah, we've kind of started the process,
Beautiful.
but yeah. So, and I came up with the name Bridge to Forever, which is kind of a takeoff on Return to Forever. But music to me is like, first of all, notes are like, they're invisible. Music is just in the ethereal environment around us in our.
Yeah.
So you take them and you pull them in, and then you transform them into what physical world that people can hear. So Bridge to Forever, for me, means that the music is kind of a bridge between the physical world and the spiritual world. And that's what I got out of listening to McLaughlin when I was young. It's all about your higher self and reflecting that part of yourself. It's not about trying to make a movie or play music to appeal to anybody. So yeah.
Interesting. Yeah.
So we'll come out with that.
Do you want to play live gigs also with these 2 guys? I mean, is that an option or?
Again, we get a lot of questions about that, but and I've talked to Gary. The problem is that Gary plays keyboards and drums on the album.
Oh yeah, shit, yeah.
So if we got a drummer, it would probably be like Chambers, Dennis Chambers would be good. He could play the drums, and
Yeah,
Gary
it has
could
to be
play.
really high level. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Or best of worlds would be Cobham. But if Gary came to LA, I told him, we could always do a short gig at some local clubs.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting.
But yeah, I'd love to play live with these guys, but having the recording, I'll have that the rest of my life,
True.
So
Yeah, oh, beautiful, man. Yeah,
yeah,
fantastic. Cool, James. I mean, yeah,
yeah.
it was nice to hear you. Yeah,
one
love
of
to
the
talk about this.
one of the things about Gary, I refer to him as like a Swiss Army knife. He can do everything. He's such a great synthesizer player, acoustic piano. And I had told Dean, where you hear the acoustic piano, I asked for that. And because his playing is so beautiful on acoustic, and And I mean, to me, the greatest synthesizer player was Jan Hammer, Jan
Jan
Hammer.
Hammer. Yeah, yeah, sure. Yeah.
You know, he
He
was
was amazing. Yeah, he was insane. Yeah.
yeah. I mean,
Sure.
Chick Corea was good, but he was not like as good as him.
Yeah.
David Sancious was another, you know,
Oh,
some of
sure.
my influences, guitar players that grew up was Icarus Johnson, um, David Sancious, Forest of Feelings album was great. John McLaughlin, Al Di Meola, I saw him live numerous times. In fact, when I saw him with Return to Forever, and when he first started with them, he played in Santa Cruz. And this is why we connected later. He used to record their concerts on a cassette player, and I was sitting in the front row, and he asked me if I could turn it on and off between the songs. And I said, sure. So then after the concert, he asked if I wanted to come and hang out the hotel room with him and the band. I said, sure.
Oh,
So
wow, beautiful.
yeah, so I went to a place called the Dream Inn, and I walked in the hotel room, and here comes Lenny White with a girl under each arm. He had a bow around his neck and his sombrero hat. Stanley Clark was laying on the one bed reading L. Ron Hubbard's Scientology book. And Al Di Meola was out on the balcony with a girl. Of course, he was, you know, very cute back then and ladies' man, drinking a beer, talking to her. And I was sitting on the bed talking to Stanley about Dianetics and Scientology. And Chick Corea came and knocked on the door and to tell them he was driving up to San Francisco that night for the gig the next night. And when he came in, Al Di Meola threw the beer off the balcony into the swimming pool because in Scientology they're not supposed to be drinking or anything, and he had rules. So which Al will tell you became a point of contention. And it
Mm.
was with a lot of members in there that he had played with. Scott Henderson, that's why he didn't work out in
Oh,
the
yeah,
band.
exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So, so anyway, so that I met Al then and hung out with them. And then I met Al in Maui years later. I was a manager at a restaurant. And uh, well, I met Al after that. No, before that. So I met Al at the Hyatt. I was working as a waiter in a restaurant, and my mom was waiting for me. And she was talking to Al Di Meola in the lobby. He bought her a drink. And she goes, oh, I was just talking to Al Di Meola, blah, blah, blah. And I go, what? You know, he's here. And then I saw him walk by. And she goes, yeah, he bought me a Mai Tai, and we were talking, and I told him you're a guitar player. So I ended up getting a job a little later as another person I met along the way. Mark Egan and Danny Gottlieb
Sure.
used to do a duo together where Mark would put a digital delay on and play over it, and Danny Gottlieb would play drums. So they were on their way back from Japan doing a tour, and they stopped in Hawaii, and they stayed at this restaurant I was managing that was also had 14-room hotel out in kind of a jungle. So they were going to play there a couple nights, but Mark's digital delay got lost. But I had one exactly like it, I told him, at home. So I brought it to work, and he ended up using it.
Mm.
So I ended up jamming with them.
Mm. Wow.
We ended up leaving the restaurant, and a friend of mine was building a house, and they had a structure of a foundation and generators there to work on the house. And we ended up turning the generators on, and I was playing my guitar, and I'm jamming with Mark Egan and Danny Gottlieb, you know, out of the blue. And I was asking them advice. You know, they were telling me, yeah, well, you can do what Joe Satriani did and come out with an incredible album and, you know, make it, or you can be a side musician for many years and then eventually get your break. So
Mm.
yeah, so interesting story there. So I ended up
Interesting.
talking to Al on Facebook and telling him the story about that. We were talking about how he would write a book, and a lot of people don't know not the darker side, but the other side of Chick Corea, and he would put it in the book. And Yeah, so I communicate with Al once in a while. I did congratulate him being on the ballot.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
said, hey, I'm on the ballot too, So it's just funny how it's full
yeah,
circle.
yeah, yeah, definitely
Yeah. So I've
interesting.
had an interesting career. Nobody knows who I am. I'm kind of the unknown guy that's all of a sudden playing with, you know, two guys that are, or the primary drummer for Alan Holdsworth and
Yeah, yeah,
McLaughlin,
definitely. Yeah,
and the keyboardist with Cobham. And people are kind of wondering, who is this guy, James Morgan, I've never heard of him,
yeah,
and the album's getting nominated and all this stuff. So um, I'm hoping, obviously, I'm getting the attention, but I want to parlay it into being able to keep doing the music
yeah, yeah, exactly.
and getting into people like you and older people that know the jazz
Yeah, yeah,
fusion industry, but
yeah,
also reintroduce it to a new generation.
yeah,
But getting to this the market's different now. As you know, again, 90,000 songs come out every day,
yeah.
charts, this, and that, and the other. The way charts work, as you probably know, is it's all about how many spins you get. And then those spins transfer into where you are in the charts. So I spent the last 4 years with my marketing partner, smoothjazz.com, Sandy Shore. They would send out email blast songs to 92. There's 92 reporting stations. So every week the charts come out on Monday. I would go ahead and send an email blast out every Tuesday for 4 years, never missed a week, thanking them for the spins or asking them for spins,
Yeah,
marketing myself. And that's how I kept on the charts, always in the top 100. And that's, how I did that, built that brand, the Ghost Jazz Trio brand. So if you go to jazztrio.com, band.com, or you go to Facebook, James Fusion Fingers Morgan, or Ghost Jazz Trio, anywhere, all the Morgan Husband Feraud trio stuff is on there because it's already built in.
yeah,
I already have
sure.
a following. And so I've been working at this. A lot of people think, oh, he came out of nowhere. It's just like a comedian or anybody. You play the small clubs and small places for 10 or 20 years, and then you make it.
Yeah,
Now's my time, I guess. And that's the way I look at it,
yeah, yeah,
you know.
definitely. Yeah,
So what a way to go out.
man. Yeah. Well, hope for tomorrow. Looking forward already to the new one. Like really,
Yeah. Yeah.
really much.
Yeah,
Beautiful.
in today's music, again, with TikTok and Snapchat and Instagram, there's a lot of great, you got great musicians. You have Matteo Mancuso,
Sure.
all these guys that play like Holdsworth. He's the big flavor now. Everybody wants to sound like Holdsworth.
Yeah.
Well, that's great that you can do all that stuff. And they put on these clips where they're just phenomenal. But that's all they're known for.
Yeah,
They're
yeah.
just known for
Yeah,
playing,
Instagram guitarist. It's actually it's called, like
yeah,
it's a
and
brand. So
YouTube shorts and all
yeah,
that.
yeah,
So
yeah,
even though these guys, I could never play like them, and I know Al feels the same way. He's blown away by these guys, and if they would have came out in the '70s, they would be phenomenons. Um, but they're never going to be known for an album or a
no,
band,
they don't do that. Yeah, yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah,
And they can't because the record labels are basically gone. So there's no one's going to listen to an album anymore. They're
yeah,
just going to listen to clips, and short songs on Spotify or wherever. So I kind of feel bad for them, but again, they're spending 10 or 12 times to get that perfect clip,
sure.
smooth technique. It's all technique, but there's nothing else there. There's no story.
I agree absolutely. Yeah,
They don't have their
yeah,
own voice.
yeah,
When you hear Al Di Meola, I mean, he's even playing stuff he did in the '70s because that was stuff that made him who he known.
Yeah,
And people love to hear it. And McLaughlin, I mean, he's one of the few that's kept creating new music. I mean, Fourth Dimension's totally different than
yeah, yeah.
Bobby Schnorr.
Oh, absolutely.
And I think that's amazing because he's that level up that he can
Yeah,
just
he's evolving all the time. Yeah,
all the
incredible. Yeah,
time,
incredible.
in his 80s. So again, I'm just going to do the album thing. You can release an album using what is known as the waterfall technique, where you do a single out for a few months, you do another single, you do another single. You acquire all those numbers as far as spins and all that. And then when you can release the album, you can combine all that with the album and it makes the album even bigger.
Yeah, exactly.
So I'll do that probably with the next album.
Fantastic.
Doing that. And there'll be more songs too. So people
Beautiful.
want. So
Yeah, absolutely.
but again, the music industry is so different now. And I tell people, they'll come up and say, how do you make it in the music business? And I'll say, you know what, you got to have a story. And I have a story, obviously. I've been talking nonstop for all this time, and all that story comes out musically,
Yeah.
And I feel bad for a lot of these great guitar players that are out there right now, because they go out and do an Alan Holdsworth session to tribute to Alan Holdsworth, and nothing's a band, everything's ensembles. They're all guests, artists playing with each other. It's a different world now. So
True.
yeah,
definitely. But yeah, I think good music in the end comes out, or survives or stays. That's always been like that, and
yeah.
I think that's how it will be still. I hope, I guess.
I think this album is great because the drums, first of all, music out nowadays, especially in smooth jazz, it's grooves with no changes.
Yeah, like you said.
I love bridges. I love slowing down, tension and release. It's like when someone talks and they talk with a lot of pauses, people listen more if you stop, like I'm doing right now, right? But if you talk and you just keep talking, and that's the way the playing is, you hear they're doing the melody and there's a double kick and they're grooving, and all of a sudden they go into the solo. It doesn't really sound anything different than where the melody was. And to me, that's boring. It's monotonous. It's mundane. I want to hear, and that's what I love about what Gary did when he heard these songs. He took these songs and his drums, he cymbals, and then he comes way down, and and it's like, and then the bass, he's not constantly just slapping and doing. And it's just so much color, know. And I think this album, that's why it got noticed. I hope it does get a nomination. I really do, and it deserves it. Not just for me. To me, it's just an accolade that I can use to get more work, but really, again, to honor Dean Brown, who to me was an educator, great musician. He moved around. He was animated on stage. He actually introduced Hadrien to Western United States. He came over here, and he was just so amazing, and he was such a great writer. I mean, the compositions are beautiful. Dean would be so proud of this album.
Definitely.
So but to play with Gary and Hadrien, let me tell you, they're
sure. I know.
Gary's and very, very nice. Both of them very cool. Hadrien is more of a wild card, kind of a smart ass, shoot from the hip guy, and Gary's very proper, Englishman.
Yeah. Beautiful, man. Cool, James. I mean, I think we covered so much.
How are we looking at time here?
Yeah, I think
about to wrap up.
I think I'll let you go slowly. So I'll go to bed here.
I did want to take this opportunity to let people know they can go to Bandcamp.
Yeah.
They can type in Morgan Husband Feraud, A Soul in Time. You can get a digital copy of the album. In Europe, unfortunately, it's about a $30
Yeah, sure.
shipping
Yeah.
charge.
Sure.
But people have been buying it like crazy still from over there, which is amazing to me. I lowered the price on the CD so that, you know, they're basically paying shipping. And then you can get the digital, and then the other album, the last album Dean played on, Groove and Smooth, which is also on Bandcamp on the same platform. And yeah, again, if they want to stay tuned to see if how the album does for the Grammys, you can subscribe to Ghost Jazz Trio YouTube channel, Facebook, Instagram, and I'm real excited, you know, to announce more. And if it doesn't, hey, just to be on the ballot's very, very big. And I want people to know more about me because a lot of people don't. And I really appreciate you giving me the platform to talk.
Gladly, man. Beautiful. Yeah. Well, thanks for finding the time and making the music, you know, and looking forward to more, like I said, you know. So beautiful.
Absolutely. And keep exposing everything you do with all that lessons and intervals and all this stuff. I've actually watched a lot of your
Really,
stuff.
yeah, I started doing this now. I like, you know, I teach so many students live here, so I was like, shit, I'll drop some stuff online.
Well, it's very hard for me to learn after playing by ear for so long. And a lot of people say they're self-taught, but there's no such thing as self-taught. You learn from records. I watch YouTube videos, and they'll say, okay, you can use melodic minor and harmonic minor scales this way. And I watch them. The discipline involved it's, you know, for a 67-year-old guy that's been playing a certain way, it's really hard.
It's hard, man. Yeah, I know. I can imagine. Yeah.
But yeah, I'm just going to have fun doing what I'm doing. And again, I appreciate the opportunity to speak with you today.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for finding the time as well. So cool, James. Thanks so much, sir.
All right. Peace, brother.
Bye.